which we can find widely discussed in the literature. So how's it for an archaeologist? Well, I'm a dirty digger. We're often thought of as people who have got more grey matter under our fingernails than between our ears. And I happen to think that actually, although it's easy to dig things up, it's quite hard to make sense of them. And archaeology is quite a philosophically demanding business. This is I didn't excavate this year because we've got a bit of a backlog from the last 3-4 years of field work. I work with cavers. We really are quite a dirty lot, and we do quite a lot of cave archaeology. This is a site we were working on last September in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, Cove Hole, which we're presently processing the data from, and the sorts of stuff we've turned up here, quite excited about really, is probably the earliest direct human remains from northern Britain. So we've got a child's, there's a deciduous molar from a child, and another tooth that we're puzzling over. We haven't had this one dated yet because this is our only definitive piece, and we're just we're getting all the rest of the ducks in a row in terms of the digitisation of diagrams and things. But this is found underneath a collapse of a scar face, which probably dates to the Younger Dryas period. And so what we've got underneath that, I had a lot of fun blowing those rocks up with various forms of explosive compound and alerting people on the Pennine Way to our presence thereby. But underneath that, then in what we would call a late glacial context, we have a tooth, and then a periwinkle shell, and a marine periwinkle shell, and a riverine mollusk. And both of these are not actually natural objects. They were natural objects, but this has been drilled and that has been snipped. And it's part of a shell necklace. And in fact, probably what we have on this site is the last remains of a formal ritual burial from around about 10,000 years ago. So we've got two things here. In a sense, we've got a natural object, which is a tooth, which will be modified, obviously, by technological behaviours, and then we've got a natural objects here, which have been turned into shell beads, and we call these artifacts. And probably most of you will find that unremarkable that those are called artifacts. But there has been a very strong trend over the last 20 years, I suppose, by big thinkers in the area of human cultural evolution to try to ignore theoretical archaeology and its insights and to reduce culture and technology to a series of biological explanations. That's come out of the discipline of evolutionary psychology, which is the successor really to sociobiology, and in work such as that by Tooby and Cosmides, we read statements such as human minds, human behaviour, human artifacts, and human culture are all biological phenomena. And for me as an archaeologist, that's problematic, because when we look at our artifacts, we don't see the patterning of artifacts happening in a Darwinian way. I cannot see that. There may be small areas of patterning where you might say there's competition between artifact forms, but they are fundamentally, it seems to me, fundamentally different. So in the next part of the lecture, for about 10 minutes or so, I'm going to address, I suppose, the most famous attempt to produce a biologically reductive explanation of human culture. It's something I address in the book, but it's technical in a way, and so for a more popular science treatment, it's harder to go into greater detail. And I've got a technical paper coming out on this soon called The Problem of Darwinising Culture, or Memes as the New Phlogiston. I hope that most of you know what phlogiston is, but it was postulated as a medium in which fire could take place, and the loss on ignition and so on was in the 18th century was attributed to this mythical medium which nearly all reasonable scientists believed in and which in fact didn't exist. So I'm going to talk, the term meme this is from an abstract for the paper that's coming out, was coined by Richard Dawkins, and it's effectively, it's the idea that technology behaves like biology and therefore is simply an extension of it. So it's in the Tubular Cosmides mould. This is the direct quotation from The Selfish Gene, where Dawkins writes, "I think Darwinism's too big a theory to be confined to the narrow context of the gene. I think that a new kind of replicate has recently emerged on this planet. It's still in its infancy, still drifting clumsily about in its primeval soup, but already it's achieving evolutionary change at a rate that leaves the old gene canting far behind. The new soup is the soup of human culture. And we need a name for this new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission." And he picks this word meme, which, as you will know, has now developed since he coined the term in 1976. And my daughters now use the word meme to refer to little snippets on the internet which can be moved around and forwarded to one another. So in a sense, the idea is maybe settling down to something more appropriate to scale. But he brought up this idea that there are these things. I mean, the problem he had in The Selfish Gene, I addressed in the Prehistory of Sex, because he says that we alone on Earth, through contraception, obviously contraception's an important issue for geneticists, because there are people living fulfilled lives and not having children quite deliberately by technological means, thwarting that happening. He says we alone on Earth can rebel against our genes. And so in a sense, he has admitted at that point that we're not anymore Darwinian entities in the standard sense. And in order to maintain the coherence of the theory, he then has to postulate these memes. And then, I mean, I won't get into this, but there's been really a widespread intellectual response from social anthropologists and archaeologists about why meme is ill-defined, unnecessary, and clouds the issue in a sense. Rather than being analytical, it is actually obfuscating. And I won't go in, I mean, I've just put some, I won't read those quotes up there, but Dawkins himself sort of reined back from his early formulation of the meme, but by that time, I'm afraid the sort of genie was out of the bottle, and people like Susan Blackmore, for example, have then attempted to run with the idea to suggest that humans are machines that produce memes, and that therefore all of technology can be accommodated within a survival of the fittest structure. Well, the issue, if we now juxtapose again biology and culture, this is here's a little branching scheme, which there are many of these because people can't quite decide what happens among Australopithecines and early Homo and what leads to what, but that's sort of quite a good one. We know that what's going on here, of course, is that creatures are reproducing. They're having sexual reproduction is going on. There is descent with modification, and there is selection on what is descended, either natural or the special type that Darwin identified of sexual selection. So something is going on there. And broadly speaking, we would have to say that large brains are being selected for up that line. When we turn to artifacts, you can see that you can also graph artifacts like that. This is from an old Encyclopedia Britannica. But actually, medieval knights' helmets don't have sex with each other. That's not how they're produced. That variance is not produced genetically. And in fact, when you begin to investigate this sort of variance, when you begin to investigate this sort of variance, you find that it is a very